Welcome to How to Execute Using Agile. We're really excited about this topic. It is a service that we have been providing for a while now that we are finding a lot of interest, and it's really delivering results for our clients. So we're excited to share it with you guys. This whole presentation follows our focus on improvement value that we have at AJC. We aren't content to sit still and let things just always be the way they always have been. We like to improve. And so today we're going to talk about a few things. First, why is this so hard, right? It is hard in companies when people have their daily jobs and things to do extra work, improvement work, or even project work. So we'll talk about why that is and acknowledge that. Also, we already had a lunch and learn on this topic, so I will only touch briefly. There are a lot of things you can do, so you have to really focus and decide where you're going to put those resources. So what are you going to actually work on for improvement or in terms of projects or execution? And then now you know what you're going to do, assembling the right team for it. This is a very critical component of Agile that I think is different than a lot of traditional methodologies for project management. We'll go into the actual nuts and bolts of this, and we've got Grace Chang here, who is our expert in Agile execution. She's been leading these Agile operating models for several clients, so Grace is going to help me by chiming in with some practical advice here as well. And finally, tips and takeaways. So, all right, so this is one of my all-time favorite cartoons. When we are talking about improvement or executing any kind of projects, it means that there's something happening today that's working, right? Because improvement is changing something that's already working. And so from this cartoon, you know, something is working, but there certainly could be something a lot better. And a lot of times people don't change just because they feel too busy or overwhelmed to make any changes. Not the only reason people don't do this, though. I feel like in our experience, the last 16 years of doing business, also work before that, somebody is trying to be let in, so I hope, Aaron, you can let that person in. Anyway, it's really very obvious when there's not one person responsible for any kind of improvement, and you know, maybe a leader says, hey, you guys go do that, or our team needs to do that. But if there's not one person responsible, it's really, really hard to make things happen and make sure they get done. And then finally, you know, everybody does have a day job that keeps them busy. And so doing something on top of that is also a challenge. All right. All right. So again, acknowledging that this is hard to do. None of what we're going to say is a lot of rocket science. It makes a lot of common sense, I'd like to think, but it's kind of like having a personal trainer. If you have someone keeping you accountable, then you can do it. But first, before you want to make any kind of change, you need to decide what you're going to do. And this slide is straight out of that lunch and learn we did before called How to Prioritize Projects. And I will link it when I send an email after this, but it is on our website. There's a lot more things to do than there's people, money, or time with which to do them. And of course, if everything is important, then really nothing is. So this image from that lunch and learn is our prioritization tool. We created this based on, for all of you engineers on this call, based on failure mode effect analysis, which is an engineering tool that's used to detect a lot of failure problems in different things. But we basically have come up with a business need, an objective way to take your entire list that you see here on the B column and prioritize or score them objectively based on criteria that make sense to your business. The three that are shown here are very generic for a process improvement situation. How frequently are you using that process? How impactful is it on your business? And how effective is it today, right? How square are those wheels versus how round they might be? And when you score those things as a leadership team and multiply them across, you come up with a priority score. And when you sort by that, it turns something that's otherwise very subjective, right? The leader's voice counts the most, or the consensus, or whoever's the most talkative, or pet projects, but it turns it into a numerical score and it helps you decide what to do. We always start our projects like this, whether it is, you know, the client has a lot of projects they need to do, they know they need to improve a lot of different things, they're just not sure where to start. Whatever it is, this is it's a very helpful tool. I realize I'm glossing over that. I'd love for you to watch that previous lunch and learn. It's about 20 minutes. Okay, So now you know what you want to do, and this is getting more into the how to execute using our Agile methodology. We talk about assembling the right team. The right team is really cross-functional. That example that you saw over there at the top, it was something like there was an info security breach. If you only have the people that are going to be the IT technicians working behind the scenes in your cross-functional team, but you don't have, let's say, the person who discovered this in the first place, how do you know how they're finding out about that problem? How do they give you that information in the first place? How do you know that when you've resolved it, they've reconciled it and they know it's resolved? You need to assemble a cross-functional team. All right, and I think we often think about only the people doing the work being part of the project. That's really more traditional, but in an Agile opportunity or Agile model, we want to involve all the stakeholders in some way. So they may not have as many tasks, but really think about who's representing the inputs or the customers of this initiative. It might not always be practical to bring your actual customers in from different companies, but internal processes, certainly you can. Or you can bring in a customer service person that represents them in some way. And then what other areas might be affected, right? So in the information security example, again, accounting could be affected. Maybe it's financial information that's been breached or could be breached, or marketing because they're collecting information about people from websites. So who's representing those interests, those other groups that could be affected? So thinking about assembling the right team, and we'll talk more about the mechanics a little later. This is a question we get a lot, and we'll talk more about this too, but the right team does include people with some capacity. So you've already prioritized what's important to your business. People have to have some time to be able to do work. And there's a few roles within Agile that we'll describe here. The first one is what we call the product owner, or maybe a champion or a leader. And this is the person that really understands that improvement area, and they can articulate the main components of that improvement. Maybe it's a business process, maybe it's a project that's their brainchild. They understand it, and they're authorized to prioritize sort of the main components within it. The work is being done by this cross-functional team of subject matter experts. I'm sure you've all used that phrase before. Within that set of work or that process that needs to be improved, and those major components, they'll delineate out all the specific tasks, and they will know who needs to do those, and they'll help sequentially order those tasks. And then they're going to pull the tasks that are the top in a sequence and commit to completing them in a certain a discrete period of time, right? So from the top down, they'll commit to how many they're going to complete in the sprint timeframe. And the third role, we call it the Agile Project Manager. In true Agile Scrum, this is often the Scrum Master role, and I'm going to ask Grace to share a little bit or chime in here, but the Agile Project Manager really runs this process. So they aren't part of the subject matter expert team. They are monitoring the sprints, they are tracking things, they're making sure people do the work within the sprint or the Scrum process. So Grace, I'd love to just, if you don't mind, sharing a bit about why is it important in your opinion that the Agile Project Manager be different from one of the subject matter experts?
Yeah, the Agile Project Manager, they really identify areas of opportunity for Agile ways of working within the project or for the team, and help really frame the Agile operating model. So it's helpful to have that kind of psychological distance from the work and what you're doing, yet have maybe a complementary expertise, so knowing generally what's going on. So I've seen where there's people who have tried to do the Agile Project Manager role and be an SME. And sometimes it's hard to switch between the different hats of doing the kind of distance work, looking strategically at the overall, trying to optimize holistically, yet also be a part of the work. And I mean, we all know that your people are pretty booked with their time. And so some people don't have that brain capacity or time to be able to do both roles. And so I know one of the clients that I've had where they were trying to deliver and execute a plan on remediating audit findings. And there was kind of a backlog of things for them. They were just trying to deliver, but they couldn't see how to strategically look at how to work through things in an agile fashion. And so, for me and a colleague of mine, we were able to have that brain space to think about the whole framework and what would work best for them from a whole perspective, but even for each audit finding project, we were able to help them set up their Trello Kanban board for visibility and think through how can they have more frequent but shorter check-ins, and even have a space where the project owners could update asynchronously, but then also be able to tailor for each project owner and dive in and say, how can we use Agile in your specific project? So really having someone separate to have that brain capacity to think about things strategically and be a champion for Agile when not kind of being in the weeds of the actual work is really helpful.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Grace. All right. We get this question all the time. How much capacity do my team members need to give, right? We're all really busy, and clients are always asking us, they almost want to know, like, can they only give 15 minutes a week? And you're thinking to yourself, this is your top priority? It's really not realistic. But how much capacity is a very real and meaningful discussion. And so, like any consulting answer, it depends. So I would encourage people to think about how much time do people have on these cross-functional teams, right? You're going to do this project. It's the highest priority, and we know we need certain types of subject matter experts that are cross-functional. How much time do they have without sacrificing the critical operations of your business? And I will say, you probably saw, we have this last column. It's on either compliance, but you can also use it for seasonality. So we have a client right now, they have a really heavy fourth quarter. And so what we did is we said for any of the projects that would require people to be doing things that are busy in this fourth quarter, we can't do those in the fourth quarter. So even if they're the top of the list, if we're at the end of September, they're the next thing on the sprint list, those projects can't happen in Q4. So you can tailor this. It's your business. You need to do what makes sense to keep running it. So I would think about what type of capacity people will have without sacrificing those critical operations. And then the other question is, how fast do you want, or how fast do you need whatever it is to be done or to improve? If you have an audit, for example, looming over you, and you have to get something finished by a certain time frame, you might have to sacrifice other things to give people time to do whatever it is. So those are a couple of questions to think about. Here is our generic answer. For that product owner role, so this is sort of the champion of either that business process or that particular project that's kind of sequencing the major components and they know about what's needed, it doesn't actually take that much of their direct time. They need to be experts, though. These people are strategic. They're probably longer term in your organization. They know you well, but only a couple of hours every sprint cycle. And sprints, we typically run 2-week sprints, although some can be 3 weeks. So that's not a ton of time, really. Subject matter experts vary. And typically, and you'll see this in a couple slides from now, a visual of the process itself, but we will run huddles. They're about 15 to 30 minutes every morning over this channel of a screen or a virtual channel. So everybody should be at all of those huddles. If you don't have any tasks, you're at least spending an hour and a half in those huddles, but you probably have a few tasks. So I put 4 to 10 hours depending on how much they have and how much of their work is going to be needed for that sprint. Certainly, it could be more. And Grace, feel free to chime in if I'm off on this one, but I feel like the Agile project manager, they have to be in all the huddles. They're removing roadblocks on the back end. To Grace's point, they are trying to consider the bigger picture and what's going to work best for the team and maintaining that mind space for that brain space for that. We typically see this at about 10 to 20 hours per week per sprint. And when there's a planning week or a review or retro week, it's probably closer to that 20 and otherwise about 10. What are your thoughts, Grace?
Yeah, it can vary. It can be a little bit less. You can, if they're seasoned, it could be easier for them, and they can know how to optimize their time for that. So it could get down to around 20-25 hours for a sprint. So not necessarily per week. So it really just depends on how seasoned they are, how good they're able to maneuver within this space.
Yeah, that's a fair point. As your subject matter expert teams get more seasoned in this, they're more familiar, then it's lighter work on the person managing the process. Okay, so here we go. This is our visual. This visual is pulled from True Scrum, and we have modified True Scrum because most of our clients just don't have resources that can give 40 hours a week to improvement projects. So you can see on the, it's either left or right, but you can see the product backlog. So that's that main list. I think you might remember this one, right? Column B, it's all the stuff. And you prioritize it to the top. And then you do a planning session for whatever it is that you're actually going to work on, the top one, or maybe you're doing two, and we'll talk about how many to do simultaneously. And within that, you've got the main components, the product owners help with that, and then this team puts together the sprint backlog of tasks. And they're the ones who pull off the top the things they're going to commit to sequentially. And you can tell from that image, it's different colors, that's sort of representing the cross-functional nature of the team. And then that little circle there, they have a daily scrum. And Grace, feel free to chime in here because I know some of our customers daily has been too much. They've backed it off to what, 3 times a week or something?
3 times a week, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For some of them.
Yeah, and then at the end of the sprint, which again is 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks, again, we can change that. They have delivered something. Theoretically, they've delivered the things they were committing to. And as they go through this process, they'll get better about sizing and really understanding what they can commit to over that time. But they will deliver something, that's the box. And then we'd like to do a review. And I was actually sitting in for one of our team members, I think it was last summer, in this role. And we did this review for not only the team members themselves, but their managers and really anyone else who cares or who we think is relevant will invite. It's like 30 minutes where the team gets to showcase what they've done. And that feels really good to the team. They're like, hey, look what I finished. Look what we really did. It also helps with communication because so many managers tell us, I have no idea what my team is working on. This is a way to make that knowledge work visible to them. Managers can look at the sprint backlog and the tasks. These are the things your people are working on right now over this 2-week time period. And here is what they've actually completed, and they get to talk to it. And people feel so much better just having that knowledge that every 2 weeks, as a manager, they're going to see what people have done, and the people feel good being able to share those accomplishments. So they'll do that review, and then you can see it kind of going around to a retrospective, and I'll ask Grace to chime in at the retrospective. But what I appreciated about that is, you kick the managers out. Now it's just the team, the sprint team who works. And the Agile project manager will ask, hey, what did we do well this time around? And how can we improve? And it's about the process. It's not about an individual person, right? It's what can we do better? Should we do these 5 days a week? Should we back it off a little bit? Should the sprint be 2 weeks? Should it be 3, right? So that's where the team gets to talk about those things and use those incremental improvements to drive continuous improvement in the process for the next sprint. Grace, do you have anything to add on review or retros?
Yeah, for the retrospective, I think one other great opportunity that you get out of that is being able to talk about the blockers. So a lot of times I'll see as an Agile project manager, a pattern in certain blockers. And so when I start to see that, whether it's a behavior thing that the team needs to be reminded of, or whether it's an actual blocker that needs to be re-escalated or revisited, or maybe it shows up in a different form, then that allows me to go to the product owner or someone else to escalate and be able to say, hey, this is actually really causing some block for a majority of the team members, like procurement, right? There's this long delay time. How can we make that process smoother on a business level? Or maybe it's the unclarity of a definition of done. The team members are able to say, hey, I don't actually really understand what that task is. And so I need to understand the why or the what a little bit better so I can determine the how. So it's a really good place for the team members to be able to critically think about the work and the process and even their involvement in everything and to be able to come and be transparent. I think that's one really important aspect of Agile, that we don't take that time to really be transparent because people just look at the outcome and saying, why aren't we finishing this thing? Or why aren't we meeting our goals? But there might be some opportunities within those retrospectives that can bring those to light that we can help the team do their work.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Grace, about bringing things to light, because in the darkness, you just don't know. But when you shine the light, you can really work to help. And I think to Grace's point about the Agile project manager being able to escalate, the example I have is from that time last summer. The team was trying to get work done. And one thing they found was they were actually in the office last summer, but they were constantly getting interrupted by people coming to their desks. And one of the big blockers that was a theme across seven different offices was this exact same thing of people coming to their desks, but they were too nervous to tell their manager that that was the reason they couldn't get their work done. But once they found out that everybody had the same problem, then and I actually voiced it for them. Nobody wanted to be the one who said it and complained, but hey, this is happening to everybody. And here's some suggestions that we brainstormed about how we can preserve this time, like a curtain or block time on calendars or working from home or getting in early, all these different examples. And the managers were able to make some changes so these people had preserved time. It was a really specific example that came out of a retro. Okay, so then you might ask, well, right, great, you've done these sprints. Now what happens when this first one is over? Our recommendation is that the leadership team or steering committee would reprioritize that same master backlog, usually about quarterly, because that's about how long, if you're on EOS, you redo your rocks every quarter, and a pretty good time frame. And new things may have happened. There might have been a global pandemic, for example, and you need to reprioritize the things you want to do as a business. So the leadership team comes back together and they will reprioritize with your same scoring. They'll add anything new and they'll reprioritize. And if some of the work in the previous, set of sprints hasn't, to Grace's point, it's not done to the true definition of done, that same thing will stay on the list. But at this point, the leadership team gets to decide, is it done enough, right? Have we gotten 80% here and we're good to hold off and prioritize something else, or do we want to keep going with this one? So it again offers a dynamic way of reprioritizing based on what's actually happening in the world and in your business at the time. Anything to add there? Okay. All right, so just a few tips and then we'll open it up for any additional questions. So again, the Agile project manager is really the facilitator. They're not a member of the subject matter expert team. They're facilitating that improvement backlog creation with leadership, as well as all of the sprints. Product owners, the subject matter experts, they can be different for each of the items on the big backlog. You can have different product owners, right? One business process owner owns this one and a different person owns that one because that's the real expert. And the subject matter experts can change each time. We highly recommend, if you're doing this Agile operating model for the first time, start with one or maybe two sprint teams and one Agile project manager. So Grace, is here because she's now started this many times. And one client in particular, they wanted to get in there and start immediately with everybody. And it's really hard to do that. Everybody being, like a couple hundred people. Now we have to train them all. Let's get one or two things. Sprints aren't very long. You do this for a couple, 3 or 4 sprint cycles, and then you can expand it from there. So 1 or 2 teams at a time to get started. And then after that, you've worked kind of the bugs out. And, everybody's like, well, you guys should be able to write a process for this. Well, we certainly can, but you might say, we are going to huddle 3 times a week, or we are going to huddle 5 times a week. It's like if you do pick up basketball and you're going to say, hey, our free throw line is going to be here. We're going to allow 5 in the key instead of 3 in the key. Whatever it is, your company will have your own rules, and you want to document that for your company. And it takes a couple of sprint cycles to get that worked out and figure it out. But you do want to document it. That will help you train the rest of the company. And here's our pro tip. You should name it. We call it an Agile operating model. You can call it whatever you want, but it should have a name so that when people refer to this process, they have something to talk about and refer to. And then, you've gotten 1 or 2 teams. They've done this a few times. They're feeling old hats. Now you can train the next team. When you're bringing in new people, you can train them to your process. And it's really important to train them. It doesn't take a long time. Grace, do you want to talk a little bit about training? I know you've done a lot of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really doesn't take a lot of time, especially if you have, I think the Agile project manager role is really the key one. Once they're trained, the team members, that just takes time, especially with behavior, just reminding them. But if you have the Agile project manager trained, we use AGC, I do, we do, you do model where, someone who has done it before and is familiar and has experience leads it, and then someone is shadowing and watching, and they have coaching sessions, and then it moves into a we do stage where both that coach or that person has experience is working with the one who is learning, and then they are kind of taking on the meetings more so, and the coach is jumping in as needed and giving them active guidance. And then the you do stage is where that person is really on their own and they really are leading everything, and the coach is really in the background, just in the coaching sessions giving them feedback. So it's a slow transition, but it gives them time to be able to see how things work, because it is a mindset shift. So
that's probably the most important thing. And so if you start with one or two teams with someone like Grace, and she does the I do part, she does the we do, and at the end there's somebody else doing it, then someone like Grace can expand that to the next group, right? And so now instead of 2 going, you've got 4 going. But your consultant or your Agile project manager that you've hired from AJC is only working on 2 at any given time, and you are growing this in your organization. So that is how we do this. And I said in our little teaser, the 7 most expensive words in business are, we have always done it that way. This is a great way to slowly and incrementally and relatively painlessly improve your organization in a way that makes sense. That is what I've got. All right. I'll stop sharing my screen and ask if there's any questions. All right. I can't tell. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? All right. Grace, I'll ask you a question. What happens when someone doesn't get their tasks done within a sprint?
So, I mean, in the beginning, usually teams might not actually complete all their tasks. It's pretty normal, just because they are overcommitting sometimes, or a product owner is trying to see how much they can get done. So they kind of push more work. And so, teams are often dealing with that, and then also trying to focus. They usually don't understand what it means to focus on the top priority items. Usually they try to complete all their tasks. So if someone has 5 tasks and they just feel like they need to get all of it done. So they start on all of it right away. But really, an agile way of working, you want to start with the top priority thing and try to push that through. So really training the team, hey, focus on one, push that through, get value delivery, right? Pass that off to another team member or whatnot, and then start your next task. And so, or if there's wait time, you can start the next task, but really try to avoid having 5 tasks that you're working on in a 3-week period, because you probably won't finish it. So the Agile project manager will be able to guide the team to be able to have that focus, and be able to focus on where the value is. And so the question of, what if they don't get it done? There might be a reason behind that behavior wise, or it might be, like I said, in the retrospective, that you'll kind of dive into the reasons for that and really asking the team and to take a look critically at, was it you just had a whole week of training, so you weren't able to, you were out of commission for a week? Or was it that, like I said, you had an unclear definition of done. So you did something, you thought you completed it, but actually wasn't what was the intention. So that's on the product owner and the Agile project manager to make sure that definition of done is clear. Or is there another blocker? So there's usually some reason. And if it really is they just weren't doing it, then you can escalate it to a manager or whatnot. But usually that's where the Agile product manager can get in there and try to make things more efficient for the team, because the team usually wants to do it.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. Gavin, you had a question?
Yeah, how do you have any best practices, or how do you deal with, I don't know how long it's going to take me to do the thing that I've been tasked to do?
Yeah, the best way is to chunk it into smaller increments of work and then be able to see how long it's taking you, and check in for that. So let's say you have some work effort and you can actually chunk it into smaller pieces that makes sense. Let's say it's we call them stories, but like a 5-story piece of work, and they can actually complete one within one sprint. Let's say it's 2 weeks. Then you can kind of see like, okay, let's take this at a time, and maybe this sprint it's 1 story, next sprint it's 1 story, maybe next sprint it's going to be 2 stories. So you can kind of gauge it that way, and maybe get them to increase their velocity a little bit more. But yeah,
that's chiming on that one. And Johnny, I see that you had a question too, but what we sometimes talk about is relative sizing and like t-shirt sizes, Gavin. So if they've got something, I don't know how long it's going to take me. That sounds like an extra large t-shirt to me. Like what's the small or extra small t-shirts that we can break this into? That might help people think about it. Yes, next question.
Hi, I have a question. If the organization, if there is an NGO, for instance, and we have a development team which is not out of organization, so how does Agile work in that scenario where the product owner or maybe the SME or the whole, the roles that you have in the Agile methodologies, they don't fit into one organization, and if there are 2 organizations which collaborate to do a project?
You mean, you said NGO, you mean like a non-government organization and a totally
exactly
different enterprise?
Yeah. So there is a project, who has an interest to do something for the society, but they don't have the skill set of a developers with them. So the development team is totally a different organization that are ready to help this organization to execute the task. So in that scenario, we'll not have all the resources from one organization because they don't have a technical background, but they may be good at coming up with a design because they interact directly with the customers and they will get an understanding of what the requirement is.
Yeah. It is not usual that 2 totally different companies would be on the same sprint. However, we have run these in, say, ERP implementations. I realize that's not exactly what you are talking about, but where there's the client and then there's the vendor. And the vendor has an analyst. We will bring them into some of the sprint meetings, and we will try our best to say, this is how we are going to execute this project. And we are expecting you to participate at this level. Now, do we have as much control when they don't do it? Like Grace said, can we escalate to their manager? That really depends. In a vendor situation, we certainly can because we're paying for it. Now, in a non-government organization, I'll be honest with you, we don't typically work there. So I don't really know the politics on that. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Because I had experience with, working such an organization about 8 years back. So I was doing the project management role. So I had to take up the management. I had to interact with the developers. I had to also do a quality analysis review. So there were so many tasks that finally came up to me where back and forth, I had to, interact with the developers to see that they complete the project. And the training should also come back to me where I have to, understand what the requirement is and also give a training. So I was just thinking, if I had to implement Agile methodologies there, how could I have done it?
If you get in that situation again, give me an email. I'd be happy to chat.
Sure. Yeah.
And I can actually give a quick kind of plug here because you can actually have a representative on the organization side who works with that team, whether it's a vendor or whatnot, be kind of almost a sub Agile project manager, right? Where they have their own little team and they can run their own little sprints or whatnot in a very light fashion. But they're taking the updates back to the organizational team, that central Agile team, and they can still keep progress moving forward, but you have almost like a sub person who is keeping track over them and saying, hey, let's have a touch base every, 2 times a week or something for 15 minutes. And let's try to break down the work still. There's still Agile ways of working that you can still implement in how they work, just to make sure work is moving through.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know. Can Agile be implemented in that scenario as well? Okay, thank you so much. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Yes.
Sure, I'll ask a question. I had a couple questions early on that I think you kind of touched on, but I'll just restate them to see if I'm understanding correctly. One of the early slides you mentioned, everyone has a day job. No one person is accountable. And so, I mean, the first thought that popped in my mind is that, while no one person may be accountable, there still would need to be someone who is in charge, who is, providing the direction, which, if I understood it right.
In the Agile framework, the Agile project manager is accountable. And what I was saying there in that side is typically a leader will say, hey team, you go fix this, right? Our business process is broken, and they'll be in a team meeting and they'll just delegate the whole team, and then there's no one person accountable. So in an Agile framework, the Agile project manager is the one. Yeah.
Gotcha. And then the other question I had was when you started talking about the Agile project manager, and it sounded initially like their relationship was primarily to the SME team, and I was just wanting to maybe clarify or understand the relationship between the APM and the product owner.
Yeah, Grace, you want to take that one?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I worked a lot with the product owner. We are tied to the hip just because we're not only helping them groom the backlog, for instance, refine it. So making sure that it makes sense, making sure that they're having a clear definition of done, those are key components. It's also important that we remind them to give the team time and the space to do the work and not giving them interrupts, because a lot of times a stakeholder might say, hey, I really want this. And immediately that product owner might turn over to the team and say, hey, actually, we need to do this. But we need to kind of protect the team. So that Agile project manager works with them to make sure that they are also upholding Agile ways of working and that mindset, so that they're not kind of breaking the rules and thinking that they have special treatment.
Don't you say Grace is a bouncer, people? I mean, she looks like a bouncer to
me. So those two roles have to be distinct individuals. Like, are there ever instances where an APM would also be the product owner?
So that one, yes, we've seen it. It does require two hats. So I think that person would have to be pretty adept as well in making sure that they are switching. I will say, that person would have to be very relational. When you are an Agile project manager, you are in retrospectives, but as a product owner, you usually don't attend those because you want the team to feel like they have a safe space. So really, if you are kind of in that higher role and they might not share as much, or they might not be as comfortable. So it really just depends on who that person is and their relationship with the team. So there is some caveat to that.
Thank you.
All right. If there's no other questions, we will adjourn for today, but you can always send a note. I did record this. I'll send a note out after it's all ready, and we'll certainly love to hear from all of you guys. So thanks for joining today. Have a great rest of your lunch period.